Hey Sakis, welcome to the stream. Hope the audio is coming through okay. Oleg, welcome to the stream. Hi Liberty Paul. Welcome Julio. Hi William. I thought I'd do a brief live stream to go over the Ubuntu fix. Now they did publish a fix for the Meltdown and Spectre bugs, and I installed it on one of my Ubuntu installs this morning, and then I ran the script to test the system, and it showed that I was protected for the Meltdown bug but not the Spectre bug. So I guess the Spectre bug has not been addressed by Ubuntu as of late. So I'm still waiting for the Arch Linux fix. I haven't done a whole lot of research on that, and the Debian fix I have not come across, but Ubuntu has responded. Now if I do a search to see if Debian has a meltdown fix. Okay, so Debian Stretch and Jesse get kernel patches to mitigate the meltdown. So I am going to have to look into that and do an install. Now this particular install that you're looking at is an open box installation using Debian stable, and I installed Debian through the net installer, so then I added all of the open box files and all the configuration that I needed to do, and this is what I ended up with. Now everything runs fine, as you might expect. Tint 2 is the panel that I'm using at the bottom. The only issue I have, and you guys might have an answer to this, the only issue I have is I have not been able to add a shutdown button on the panel. Now, I think I found a couple ways to do it, but it's going to involve creating desktop files, and right now, if I go into the Tint 2 configurator, you can see my launchers are, and I'm not sure whether you guys are familiar with configuring Tint 2, but basically all you do is go to your launcher panel and then take your applications and move them to your panel. Hi Bad Wolf, how's it going? Denton, welcome to the live stream. So you can see that I have a variety of launchers added to the Tint 2 panel at the bottom. And it's just a matter of, on Tint 2, it's just a matter of highlighting the application that you want and then clicking the arrow. So for example, if I want to move SM Player, all I do is highlight it, click the left arrow, which moves it over, as you can see, and then you have to click Apply, and then OK. And you can see SM Player is now on my panel, and all of the launchers function properly. Now, the only issue I had, because this is Debian stable, it has an older version of OBS Studio, and so I'm using it, but I had a couple of issues with it. So you guys will have to let me know if there are any issues with the audio or the video. But I set it up, and it seems to be running okay. But for example, it's an older version, so the newer versions have kind of a wizard that pops up when you first install it, when you first run it, and it asks you if you want to configure it for streaming or recording, and then it'll pretty much go through and configure itself. But that's not available on the older version in Debian Stable, so I had to configure it manually, and that's why I'm hoping that everything's running fine. Now, if I look at the live stream, I've got a good solid green here, so based on what I'm seeing, everything looks to be operating pretty well. So I'm still waiting for the meltdown and Spectre bugs to be fully addressed by Linux. From what I gather from reading what's happening, it appears that Intel is the slowdown. So they haven't been real forthcoming with information. They had this information about these bugs back in April, and they've waited just about 7 or 8 months to release the information, and so now it's depending upon the Intel providing the fix to the motherboard and computer manufacturers and having them pass it down to us. Now AMD users appear, from what I've read, they're not as affected as Intel. And so, as I said, up to now I've been building computers with Intel processors, and I think my next computer that I put together is going to be with an AMD Ryzen chip, just because of these security issues. It's crazy how Intel has been so secretive about this problem. I think it could have been addressed a lot sooner had they been a little more forthcoming with information. So this is OpenBox. Now, as I said, I might do a video on configuring OpenBox. Running with OpenBox, which is not really a desktop environment, it's a window manager, and but when you finish, as I have, it runs real solid. I've got my Broadcom Wi-Fi, as you can see in the lower right. Now, in order to put a volume control, you have to, because it's not a typical system tray, in order to put a volume control, when you start your computer, you have to auto start a little program called Volti, V-O-L-T-I. I'll show you my auto start file, and you can see how that's done. But it takes a little bit of work to configure. So here's my auto start, and I've got my panel activating after every reboot. If I use nitrogen, which I'm using nitrogen for this wallpaper, this is the command that you use to restore the wallpaper after you reboot. Here is the little volume button in the system tray in the lower right, and that is activated through a little program called Volti. And then, of course, my Compton configuration, my Conky, and then I've got a little forceful composition pipeline command that takes care of any screen tearing through NVIDIA. So that's what I'm starting up at after every boot. Welcome to the stream, Dolphin. Okay, so to be fair to Intel, the embargo that everyone agreed to didn't expire until January 9th, 2 days ago. So, now what was that embargo all about? I mean, I understand that Intel had this information back in April. So why was that not provided? Why didn't Intel provide more information back in April? That's what puzzles me. So Intel is hardware and AMD is software. I'm not too sure what you mean by that, but Intel is the chip and AMD is a physical chip, is it not? Oh, okay. So they're giving a little bit of leeway. So, but 7 months seems like an awfully long time. So now I don't have any experience with Ryzen chips, but as I said, the next computer that I put together, I'm going to try it with a Ryzen chip. Now, I've also read that there's some NVIDIA involvement in this Meltdown Spectre issue. And so NVIDIA, from what I understand, has released new drivers that address the problem. And again, the information that I'm getting, when you go on the internet and you try to find information, it's awful difficult to put it all together. The information is fragmented. Some is released by Intel, some by NVIDIA. Then you've got the people like Apple and Microsoft issuing information. It's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah, Robert, I've heard that Ryzen processors are very impressive, and so I'm running an Intel i7, which right now it's kind of old hat. It's a Haswell, and I'm thinking about starting to build another computer and using a Ryzen chip and a little bit. Right now I've got a NVIDIA GTX GeForce 1050 Ti video card it's borderline. I mean, it's not the best, not the worst, but I'd like to get at least a GTX 960. Now they've got a 6 gigabyte version of the GTX 960 that looks awesome, but you can never find them in stock. And the prices, you can find them, if you can find them in stock, you can find some in the price range of about $280. Yeah, I wonder what Leo Laporte is saying about this. I haven't checked in on Leo lately. Leo's a pretty intelligent guy. Serge, yeah, thanks for that information. Now, I understand the Ryzen chips are cheaper in price, less expensive than the equivalent Intels. So that's good also. Now, from all this security issues, I understand Intel's stock price is dropping and AMD's stock price is going up, which I would expect would be the case. Tommy, welcome to the live stream. Hey Garth, I didn't see you there. Welcome to the live stream. Got my dog trying to get up on my lap here. Oh, okay. So yeah, it's worth looking into. I've got a spare case available. It's I think it requires a mini ITX motherboard, and I bought it when I put together a Hackintosh computer, which I have no Hackintosh computers running at the moment, but I put together a Hackintosh, and I not too long ago, you guys know Fishman. Fishman loves Linux. So I basically put together a system using components from a couple of computers that I had, and I put together a system for his father, who needed a system. He had some issues, and so I put together a system from parts that I had, and I took parts out of the boxes that I had built and made up a system for his dad, and so he's happy. He's got that going, and so now I've got a case that I'm going to use to build a Ryzen system. So I'm going to have to select the proper motherboard, and I want to get a GTX 960 video card. I do have some RAM lying around because I bought some RAM when RAM was fairly cheap. So I just got to make sure that the RAM that I have will work in the motherboard along with the Ryzen chip. Well, you know, Robert, the card that I've got my eye on, because my main system is an Intel system with an i7 4700, I think, which runs fine. So I'm looking at the GTX 960 only because it's in my price range. I've got a GTX 1050 Ti, which is not as good in specs as the GTX 960. The 960 outdoes the 1050 Ti. So, Serge, is that a motherboard or a video card that you're recommending? Now, I've got an Asus motherboard in this computer, and I had a couple bugs with it, but it's running fine right now. I had a few bugs because of the amount of times I go in and out of the BIOS, changing boot order, and so I'm always in and out of the BIOS, and it was getting a little bit overworked, I think. Yeah, so the GTX 1050 Ti that I've got in this machine, it does run games better. But when I did a specs comparison against the GTX 960, the 960 came out on top. So I have no complaints about the 1050 Ti. I'm using it. The thing I liked about it is the old NVIDIA GTX 760 card that I had to be connected to the motherboard, actually to the power supply. So it would take up a PCI slot, actually two PCI slots on the motherboard, and then it had to be plugged directly in using a cable. It had to be plugged directly into the power supply. The 1050 Ti does not. It runs on its own power, and it's very smooth. I was having some issues running Euro Truck, and the Steam game. I was having some issues with the GTX 760 card, and those issues are resolved now that I'm using the GTX 1050 Ti. So that helped quite a bit. Now, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. There's a GPU test that you can run. It's a graphical test, benchmarking test on your GPU that will tell you what your GPU is capable of under stress with frame rate. And so I might do a little video on that. If you're not familiar with it, I'll provide the information. You can run that frame rate test to see just how well your GPU is performing. So have you guys run an OpenBox install? Have you got any experience with OpenBox? What are your feelings on OpenBox? Yeah, I've got an old GTX. I think it's a G. No, I'm sorry. It's not a GTX. It's a GT 740. And that one actually ran pretty good, but I don't even think you can buy those anymore. And if you can, they're probably only $50 or so. Yeah, I still have not built a Gen 2 system from scratch because I've seen so many videos on it where the process is so lengthy. I just haven't had the time to devote to it. But I would like to be honest with you. Now this particular system is running Debian stable. As you can see, it's a 4.9.0 kernel. I haven't had any issues. I mean, it's Debian stable is very, very stable. I just wish that I can put the testing version in and get a little bit later software. But I elected to go with the stable version for this particular install, and it runs super. I mean, it is really, really quick. To me, the fastest feeling desktops for me are LXDE. If you're talking about a true desktop environment, would be LXDE and XFCE, but this is OpenBox is a window manager, and it is really fast. No issues whatsoever. Now again, it takes a longer time to configure it properly. You can install a variety of panels which can make it easier. Now, for example, you could run LX panel, which is the LXDE panel, and that will give you a menu and a system tray and a little bit easier configuration. But I elected to go with Tint 2. Now, there's another one called FB panel, which is a kind of middle ground between LX panel and Tint 2. FB panel gives you a menu. It's a limited menu, My only issue with this Debian install is OB menu generator is not available for Debian. Not that I have seen. And so I like to set it up with a right-click menu, open box menu with icons, a dynamic menu, which I'm not able to achieve. This is about all I have. Now, you can go in and modify the menu file and set this up any way you want. It's just tedious. It's manual entry. So I may do it, I may not do it, but I would much prefer to be able to run OB menu generator with a dynamic menu and just have everything available with a right click. And that's one of the drawbacks with Debian Stable. Not all of the software is available. Marion, if you're putting together a new system, I guess my first question is, have you ever built a system before? And I assume you have. But you would need to know, based on the case you're using, what size motherboard you're going to use. So if you buy, I would not advise buying a case until you're sure what you're going to put in it, because you could be limiting yourself by the size of the case. So for gaming, I would think that you would need, for cooling purposes, you would need a large ATX case. And if you're going with a larger ATX case, then of course you'll buy an ATX motherboard. You'll have plenty of room on your motherboard for all of your GPUs. And you can even run multiple GPUs now with NVIDIA. I think it's SLI. You can double up on your video cards to actually achieve better GPU performance. But if I were building a system, I can tell you that I would use a ATX case with either a ASRock motherboard. And again, you'll need to know what chip you're going to use. Now, at this point, I would probably use an AMD Ryzen chip. So then you would have to buy a motherboard that will accommodate an AMD Ryzen processor. And then I would think that you would need at least 16 gigs of RAM. And then I'm not familiar with the GPUs that you would use if you were using a Ryzen chip. So you'd have to do a little, maybe some of the other people in the stream, in the chat, can give you some advice on a good ATX AMD motherboard, compatible motherboard for a Ryzen chip, and then you'd have to look into GPUs. If I were building Intel, I'd go with an ATX case. I would go with an Asus or an ASRock ATX motherboard. I would put at least 16 gigs of RAM. I would go with an minimum NVIDIA GTX 960 video card. And so that would be the minimum specs if I was putting together a gaming computer. Robert, my thoughts on Mate. I like Mate, but I'm not a big Compiz fan. And so if I use Mate, I don't use Compiz. I still end up using Compton. And then so Mate is real. I really like Ubuntu Mate, but I haven't been using it because for what I need, it's overkill. And so XFCE and LXDE to me run a little bit faster, a little bit more responsive. Surge, yeah, I was tempted to install the Sparky Linux repos so that I could take advantage of some of the applications, such as OB Menu Generator, but I haven't done that yet. I do have the information on adding the Sparky repos to a standard Debian install, and I may go ahead and take care of that. Yeah, so Marion, sounds like you've got some information, and if you're going with Ryzen and AMD, then I'm sure you'll end up with a very safe and secure, very responsive system. But if it's going to be for gaming, pay a particular attention to the GPU that you select and also the amount of RAM that you put on the board. Yeah, see, Compiz has a lot of bells and whistles and visual effects and things that I'm not really into, so that's why I've kind of lately I've stayed away from Mate, and I just set up XFCE or LXDE with Compton, and that's really all I need. Now, I am not a big fan of LXQT. I just kind of, I don't know, it's probably me, because LXQT, the last time I did an install, I tried it out and it was a little better, but I think aesthetically I prefer LXDE. And I think it's because I'm so used to using LXDE that I'm just, it's more of a safety net, it's more of a fallback. And LXQT has a lot of followers, but it looks like LXDE is going to be around for a while, because I heard it was going to be disappearing, and even now it's still out there. I mean, Sparky still has LXDE, Ubuntu still has LXDE. In Debian, you can freely install LXDE, so I think it's going to be out there a little while longer than they expected. LXQT, I think, is a little bit slower to be adopted than was originally thought. Now, Gigabyte motherboards, I have used Gigabyte motherboards, and I really like them. So if you want my opinion on Gigabyte, I like Gigabyte motherboards. Gigabyte, ASRock have always performed well for me. Asus I'm using in this computer, but again, I did have it is a little bit buggy when you're going in and out of the BIOS multiple times. I haven't seen the LXQT implementation of Red Core Linux. And so I'll be curious to take a look at that. And I'm not real familiar with Red Core Linux. Let's see. Based on Gentoo. So maybe that would be something that I would take a look at. I assume it's not a typical Gentoo build from scratch. So it was based on Sabian. I have tried Sabian Linux. So maybe I'll take a look at this, just to take a look at the implementation of LXQT. Thanks for that tip, Serge. Now, Gecko Linux gets high marks, but OpenSUSE is something that I used many, many moons ago. I started using Linux back in the early 90s, and Debian was I believe the first that I used, and then I did try a few others, and OpenSUSE was one of them. There are not many that I have not tried, and they're like, I'm not a big Fedora fan. But Fedora is very popular. But it's just not my cup of tea. And again, it's just what I'm used to. Fedora is number 7. Mint, number 1. Now, as I said yesterday, Ubuntu, to me, would be number 1 or number 2 if they included all of the various flavors of Ubuntu, like they do with Manjaro and Mint. Mint is a combined number, and I'm sure Manjaro is a combined number, but Ubuntu is not. So that makes it a little bit less than apples to apples. So guys, I'm gonna wrap this up, I think. I probably will not be doing any live streams, although I may do a live stream on Saturday. We will see, but not tomorrow and not Sunday. I've got some things planned, so I'm going to wrap up the live stream. Thanks, guys, for stopping by. I do appreciate it, and I'll wrap this up right now. I may not be back until Monday, but I will try to do a live stream either probably on Saturday. I'm using Chromium, Robert, because Chromium is easy to install in Debian right from the command line, so everything usually works fine. So that's why I'm using Chromium, but a lot of times I do use Google Chrome. Okay, guys, so take care. Thanks very much for stopping by the channel. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I will see you soon. Take care.